You're listening to Current Position, a weekly briefing from Expeditors mapping the shifts across trade compliance, regulatory changes, and global supply chains. Plus, some market insights from our Senior Vice President of Global Air, Carl Francisco. I'm Chris Parker, and here's the latest from August 19th to August 25th. First up, we have global customs and trade. The U.S. government plans to implement extended sanctions against Iran to put pressure on the country, while Iran promises to retaliate. Operation Economic Outcast, as the initiative is being called by the U.S. Department of Treasury, is aimed at cutting off Iran's global economic advantages. The goal of this effort is to put pressure on Iran to end months of conflict and to relinquish control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran and Oman, meanwhile, have launched plans to keep control over the strait. As negotiations with Canada failed over the weekend, the Trump administration moved toward the 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian products. The tariffs are being implemented under Section 338 and will impact items such as steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber. Trade negotiations have been extended from the original implementation date of August 18th in hopes an agreement could be reached, but it was not. And shortly after that, Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on $19.94 billion worth of United States goods, matching dollar-for-dollar new duties imposed by Washington. The counter-tariffs take effect on U.S. goods from September 8th and will impose duties of 15%, 25%, and 50% across 700 products. The Canadian government, meanwhile, has unveiled financial support for Canadian businesses impacted by the escalating trade war. Moving on to the ocean market. Exceptionally low Rhine River water is triggering new inland transport fees and severe capacity constraints. Carriers have reported reduced barge capacity, congestion, longer terminal dwell times, and higher operating costs across the Rhine and other European rivers. Some carriers have introduced an inland emergency fee as shippers compete for limited barge, rail, and trucking alternatives. These conditions have been created by heat waves across Europe this summer. Low water levels are having impacts beyond Europe, creating a choke on ocean movement. The Panama Canal Authority has also reduced the number of vessel transits allowed per day starting in December. Originally, the authority had communicated that it expected to increase draft allowances for larger vessels. By the middle of September, capacity will be reduced to 32 daily transits. Moving on to the global air market. Changes to the European Union's de minimis rules went into place 6 weeks ago and have impacted the flow of goods into most major airports. In July, the European Union suspended its de minimis rule, which applied to parcels worth less than €150, or approximately $175. It replaced that exemption with a flat-rate customs duty of €3 per item on goods imported from outside the EU. The U.S. saw a similar impact to air and cross-border traffic when it removed its de minimis exemptions for goods valued at less than $800 in August of 2025. Global air cargo tonnage fell 5% as summer progressed and less people were traveling globally. Data from World ACD showed Europe and Asia-Pacific volume fell 6% while Central and South America grew 2% thanks to flour exports. Even though fuel costs continue to rise, pricing held near $2.93 per kilo. And finally, global ground transportation. Multiple U.S. states saw a small victory last week in their effort to block the U.S. government from accessing commercial driver records. A federal judge granted a temporary restraining order to prevent the Trump administration from accessing almost 17 million commercial drivers' records. This coalition of states filed suit against 3 U.S. entities, while at the same time, similar legal action has been filed against the Department of Homeland Security. The Trump administration is seeking the records to support commercial driving regulation enforcement. Germany is considering a freight-focused approach to prioritizing road and bridge repairs. Congestion issues cost Germany an estimated €5.3 billion in 2025, with drivers losing an average of 47 hours in traffic. More than 8,000 motorway bridge structures also require modernization. A proposed economic reach index would weigh freight volumes, journey reliability, and supply chain importance alongside structural conditions when deciding which corridors to repair first. And lastly, Dutch truck toll costs will jump roughly 32% when a temporary discount ends in January. A Euro 6 diesel truck above 32 tons will move from €0.156 per kilometer to over €0.2 per kilometer starting January 2027. For 10,000 tolled kilometers, that equates to an additional €500, requiring carriers and shippers to revisit 2027 lane pricing and surcharges. Up next, Senior Vice President of Global Air, Carl Francisco. Hey, Carl. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. Glad to be here again.
Good to have you again. Same question I'm going to start with as I've done every other week before. What is on your mind this week?
Yeah, here we are. We're about midway in Q3, 2026, and a lot of customers are concerned about what to expect in terms of peak season capacity and peak season demand. It's our position not to predict the future because we don't really know what's going to happen.
Of course.
And the only thing we can do is try and look at what happened in the past, and hopefully that might be some indication of what might be happening in the future. Right? And we can take a look at, what happened recently.
Yeah, I guess what has the past told us before?
Yeah, so the data in the air market tends to come out rather slow. It takes a while to access all of the data in the marketplace. So we have data up until May of 2026, so from January to May, and all indications are that demand is up for the year. So at the end of May, global demand was up 7.6%, while capacity barely increased. In other words, it was mainly flat for the first 5 months of this year. So the industry is still struggling with trying to gain access to capacity, not only from the carrier side, but from the customer side. These aircrafts are not easy to come by as the demand is so strong. With a strong focus on where is that demand coming from? Well, if you look at Asia Pacific, for the first 5 months of this year, demand was up 18% coming out of Asia to the rest of the world, with capacity growth of about 1.2%. So that's the big concern area. There's so much freight coming out of Asia right now. How are we going to be able to manage all of that in the future in the industry with the limited amount of capacity to serve that market? And then, with the war that occurred back in March of this year, good indicator to look at is what does the demand look like in and out of the Middle East, as well as capacity. Well, the growth out of the Middle East for the first 5 months was about 4.5%, with capacity being reduced by 9%.
Okay.
Because of the conflict, right? So that's a big issue, obviously. So that market is still being hurt a bit, not as much as it was back in March and April. It's slowly trying to get back to normal, but they're still struggling as well.
Was it 19% increase, you said?
That's correct.
What is driving that? And something that I'm curious about too is, Adam being Promotion mentioned this situation around empty containers coming back to Asia to keep the flow of goods going. Anything like that happen to the air market at all?
Yeah, well, the exports out of Asia Pacific continues to be strong. As I mentioned, it's up 18% for the first 5 months of this year. And all the indications right now, based on what we're seeing in the marketplace and what's being published in the trades, is that June was a pretty strong month, as well as July. And then August seems to be tapering off a bit. And then all indications are that September might be busy as well, but we don't know. We don't have anything concrete on that. But July was a pretty strong month. Looking back again at Asia Pacific, so where's that coming out of? Well, primarily, again, strong demand coming out of Vietnam, Hanoi, also Bangkok in Thailand, as well as Taipei, Taiwan, all led by the hyperscaler industry and AI. We're seeing strong demand points there, and we believe that it will continue to be strong for the rest of this year.
Yeah.
E-com, as I mentioned in the past, in the U.S. market, it's relatively back, to about 80-85% before the administration restricted e-com. However, South China, Hong Kong to Europe has dropped dramatically in terms of that demand because of the new laws that went into effect in July of this year in Europe. So there's some thought that e-com might be picking up later part of this year. We expect that to happen, especially in the European market, but so far we haven't seen that yet.
Now, the goods coming from South Asia into Europe, that taking a dip, we saw that happen with de minimis in the U.S., but it sounds like companies were able to figure out how to go about it. I mean, they're just going conventional routes, right? Is that bound to happen for Europe as well?
Yeah, we're not really sure. The decisions that went into what made the U.S. change the way e-com imports into the U.S. is rather different from Europe. So in the U.S., they restricted de minimis entries and they required what's called a formal entry instead, where compliance is a high focus area in terms of meeting all of the different government regulations, as well as duty payments that will be in play with goods importing into the U.S. Whereas in Europe, they did it slightly different. In the EU, they have a flat tax. I think it was €3 every tariff that's being imported on a de minimis entry. Okay, so it becomes a financial issue in the European market in terms of whether or not that's restricting customers from continuing to purchase on e-com. And we'll see if that changes, as the market change.
When it comes to situations like that, I mean, maybe there's no precedent for it, but what has history taught us before around something like this, if anything?
If we look back at what's happened with the e-com industry, they're rather good as far as finding ways to continue to ship products out of China, Hong Kong, the way they're currently doing right now. And I believe the demand signals are so strong that they will continue to look for ways to be creative on how to sustain what they're currently doing.
Okay. You said there's some solid strength in some areas. What areas around the world or what markets around the world are not so hot right now, you think?
Yeah, again, Asia Pacific demand to North America was up for the first 5 months by about 37%. Okay, Asia Pacific to North America.
Wow.
37% increase with overall capacity only increasing by 1.4%. Whereas on Asia Pacific to Europe, that growth for the first 5 months was 17.7%. And capacity, on the other hand, grew by 15.6%. And the reason why capacity grew so much was ever since the war broke out in the first week of March, a lot of those carriers had to redirect their capacity out of that market, and now is being placed in the Asia to Europe market.
Right.
Keep in mind, again, this is for the first 5 months of 26. So the change in de minimis entries going into the EU did not take effect until July. So my expectation is that the capacity will be dramatically reduced after July, going from Asia Pacific to Europe. So what's going to happen with the capacity? I believe that a lot of carriers will redeploy the capacity into hot markets like the Trans-Pacific.
That makes sense.
Right, to serve that market.
What are the most concerning things for you?
Well, I would say that, again, if you look at the industries that's doing well in air freight, the hyperscale of the AI industries is leading the pack. Right now, that industry grew by 22% globally for air freight. Consumer goods is second at 14%. And then the slowest growing industries that what concerns me. So in your temperature control healthcare industry, it's down by 2% year over year for the first 5 months. And automotive is down for 4% for the first 5 months. So some trends going on here where you see heavily weighted on the technology and consumer goods, and not so much so on the healthcare, temperature control, as well as automotive.
Yeah. Now, for customers of ours or just any organizations out there within those verticals and those spaces and segments, what should they be thinking about, I guess, knowing that things are kind of taking a dip for them?
That's a great question. I think if you are shipping out of Southeast Asia, primarily out of Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, as well as Taiwan, I would be concerned with the limited amount of capacity that we expect to see for the remainder of this year. And if demand signals continue to be the way we've seen it over the first 6 months, there's going to be a lot of difficulty in gaining space in these markets here. So the best thing you can do is work with your provider, ensure that they understand what your forecast looks like for the last part of this year, and to protect as much as possible in terms of gaining capacity. Because I think the industry will run into problems with peak season coming up with retail, as well as the high-tech industry will continue to be strong, in my opinion.
Anything else on your mind before we close?
No, I think just stay close with your providers and make sure that you have a good feel for what's taking place, especially in those hot markets, and protect the space that you need. And don't wait till the last minute because it's going to go rather quickly.
Yeah. Forecast.
Forecast. That's correct.
Cool. Thanks so much, Carl.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
You are now at our current position. Links to everything we covered today, plus some extra articles of interest, are in the show notes. And while you're there, check out the events and webinars we flagged for the weeks ahead. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.